Okay, let's try creating a program that puts to work the state design pattern. And this one is going to use methods to interface with the user. And so it's going to be a program using various methods to interface with the user. And it's going to include various constants corresponding to the 4 different states. So we're going to keep track of which state the program is in with these constants. Fully rented equals 0. Waiting constant equals 1. The got application constant equals 2, the apartment rented state is 3, and those constants will be stored in a variable named state. I'm going to start off in the waiting state, and so the internal state is now waiting for an application. That's the way the program should start. That's appropriate. Now let's take a look at the various methods and how the method's response depends on the internal state of the program. So, for example, I'm going to start off with a constructor. The constructor is going to take the number of apartments you have to rent, store that in number of apartments. Also going to create a random number generator, and it's going to be just called random. This random number generator will be useful for determining whether or not somebody is accepted or not, accepted or rejected for the apartment, depending on their application. Okay, so let's take a look now at the application's methods. Get application is the first method, and this happens when an application is submitted. We're going to give a various responses depending on what the internal state is. So if the state is fully rented, I'm going to say sorry, we're fully rented. If we're waiting, and we're going to then print out thanks for the application and change the internal state to got application. As you see, what happens is this get application method, the response you get from the get application method is going to depend on the internal state of the program. So if you're waiting and you got an application, you're going to say thanks for the application. And if you got an application, then we've already got an application. It's going to be printed out and apartment rented. And in that case, I'm going to say, wait a minute, we're already renting an apartment. And so that apartment rented state means that the apartment is already being rented to the person. So hang on, we're renting an apartment is an appropriate response. So notice that in addition to giving you different responses depending on what internal state of the program is, you can also change states depending on the input to this application's methods. Okay, so that's the get application method. Next, I'm going to take a look at the check application method. This is when you get an application and you want to check out whether or not the person is going to be able to rent an apartment from you. And that again depends on the internal state. If the internal state is fully rented, you're going to say, sorry, we're fully rented, turn the person down. If you're waiting, then in the waiting state, you say you have to submit an application first before the application can be checked. If you have got an application and the check application method is called, then you're going to determine whether or not the person is going to be approved or not, and that is going to be done with this variable called yes no, which is a random number from 0 up to 10. And if yes no is greater than 4 and the number of apartments shows that the number of apartments are available, then you print out congratulations, you are approved. And then you change the state to apartment rented. Then you can call the rent apartment method. The rent apartment method also will depend on whether or not what the internal state is, and so you can change the state as appropriate and then call other methods. Otherwise, you say sorry, you are not approved, and go back to the waiting state. Okay. All right. So that is the check application method. Next comes the rent apartment method, and in case you're in the apartment rented state, you print out renting an apartment. That happens by decrementing the number of apartments by 1, and because the apartment's about to be rented, dispensing the keys. Okay, and the last method here is the dispense keys method, and if you're in the apartment rented state, you can print out here your keys, and then you go back to the waiting state. So as you see, all these methods depend on what state you're in for their responses. And you can get different responses depending on that internal state. So from the outside, it might appear that you have the same inputs. You get different responses. But what's actually happening, of course, is that the internal state of the program changes. Okay, so let's put this one to the test. Put this renting program to the test next and check whether or not we can actually rent an apartment.